The loneliest people in the world often live in the most connected cities. New York, London, Tokyo. Millions of faces pass by each day. Yet surveys show that urban dwellers report feeling more isolated than ever before in human history. Something darker lurks beneath this surface. The people you think are cold might actually be the most emotionally intelligent among us. They see patterns others miss. They resist manipulation that destroys others. They survive psychological attacks that would break most minds. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who mapped the human unconscious, discovered something that challenged everything we believe about human connection. His research revealed that emotional detachment is not a disorder. It is not cruelty. It is not a lack of empathy. It is survival. The human brain developed this mechanism over thousands of years to protect us from the most dangerous predator on Earth, other humans. But modern society has convinced us that this protection is a weakness, that distance is dysfunction, that boundaries are barriers to happiness. What if they lied? 3 million years of evolution crafted your ability to emotionally detach. Corporate algorithms now spend billions trying to override this ancient wisdom. They need you attached. They need you dependent. They need you emotionally reactive. Because detached people cannot be controlled. Jung paid a terrible price for this discovery. His closest relationships crumbled. His colleagues abandoned him. His mentor turned enemy. The psychological establishment branded him dangerous. Why would understanding emotional detachment threaten so many people? What truth did Jung uncover that made him so dangerous to those in power? The answer will change how you see every relationship, every news story, every social media post, and every attempt to make you feel something. Two brilliant minds sat across from each other in a study, lined with ancient artifacts and forbidden books. Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, faced his most promising student, Carl Gustav Jung. They were about to destroy each other. Freud believed that human suffering came from repressed sexual desires. Jung saw something far more complex and dangerous. He noticed that his patients who seemed emotionally distant often recovered faster than those who remained emotionally entangled with their problems. This observation would split the psychological. His mother spoke to spirits. His father doubted God while preaching sermons. Death visited regularly. By age 12, Jung learned that emotional distance was not coldness. It was the only way to stay sane in an insane world. His medical studies confirmed what his childhood taught him. Patients in psychiatric hospitals who maintained some emotional distance from their delusions showed better outcomes. Those who became completely absorbed in their emotional states rarely recovered. Freud dismissed these observations. He insisted that emotional engagement was always healthier than detachment. Jung disagreed, and their famous friendship began its deadly spiral. The breaking point came when Jung published his theory of psychological types. He proposed that some people naturally detach from emotions to think clearly, while others immerse themselves in feelings to connect with others. Neither approach was superior. Both were necessary for human survival. Freud saw this as betrayal. He accused Jung of abandoning the emotional core of psychoanalysis. Jung responded with something that shocked the entire psychological community. Maybe the emotional core was the problem. Maybe constant emotional engagement was what kept people sick. After their split, Jung entered what he called his confrontation with the unconscious. For 6 years, he deliberately detached from his normal life to explore the deepest parts of his psyche. He recorded visions, dreams, and conversations with internal figures in what became known as the Red Book. During this period, Jung made his most disturbing discovery. The unconscious mind contained not just personal memories, but collective patterns shared by all humanity. These patterns, which he called archetypes, showed him something terrifying about human nature. We are programmed to manipulate each other through emotional attachment. The mother archetype creates dependency. The lover archetype creates obsession. The authority archetype creates submission. Every culture uses these patterns to control individual behavior through emotional manipulation. Jung realized that emotional detachment was not just personal protection. It was freedom from these ancient control systems. But this freedom came with a price that few people were willing to pay. Your brain contains approximately 86 billion neurons. Each neuron can form up to 10,000 connections with other neurons. This creates a network so complex that it exceeds the number of stars in the observable universe. Evolution did not create this complexity by accident. When your ancestors lived in small tribes, emotional attachment served clear survival functions. Love kept families together. Fear prevented dangerous risks. Anger mobilized group defense. But these same emotions became weapons when tribes grew into cities, cities into nations, and nations into global networks of manipulation. The human brain adapted by developing what neuroscientists call emotional regulation circuits. These circuits can literally shut down emotional responses when they become too intense or too dangerous. This is not malfunction. It is sophisticated engineering. Studies using brain imaging technology show that people who can emotionally detach have increased activity in the prefrontal cortex, the brain region responsible for logical thinking and pattern recognition. They also show decreased activity in the amygdala, the brain region that processes fear and emotional reactions. This neural pattern allows detached individuals to see situations clearly without being overwhelmed by emotional noise. They can recognize manipulation attempts that would be invisible to emotionally engaged people. They can make decisions based on logic rather than feeling. They can resist social pressure that controls others. Modern society deliberately attacks these protective mechanisms. Social media platforms use intermittent reinforcement schedules, the same techniques that create gambling addiction to keep users emotionally attached to their devices. News organizations craft stories to trigger outrage, fear, and tribal loyalty rather than provide accurate information. Advertising agencies employ neuroscientists to design campaigns that bypass rational thinking and target emotional centers. Directly, these industries understand something that most people do not. Emotional attachment is the gateway to mental control. When someone is emotionally attached to an outcome, they will ignore evidence that contradicts their desired result. When someone is emotionally attached to a group, they will adopt the group's beliefs without question. When someone is emotionally attached to a leader, they will follow that leader even into destruction. Emotional detachment breaks all of these control mechanisms. Detached person can change their mind when presented with new evidence. They can leave groups that become toxic. They can recognize when leaders are lying. They can see through manipulation that would fool an emotionally engaged person. This ability makes them extremely dangerous to anyone who profits from human confusion and emotional reactivity. But the most dangerous aspect of emotional detachment is not what it prevents. It is what it reveals. Edward Bernays, the nephew of Sigmund Freud, wrote a book in 1928 that changed the world. Propaganda outlined techniques for controlling public opinion by manipulating emotional responses rather than providing rational arguments. Bernays understood what his uncle had discovered in therapy sessions. People make decisions based on emotions, then create logical justifications afterward. If you could control the emotions, you could control the decisions. Governments immediately recognized the power of this approach. During World War II, both Allied and Axis powers employed teams of psychologists to design propaganda that would create emotional attachment to their cause and emotional hatred for their enemies. They used images of children, appeals to national pride, and threats to family security to bypass rational thinking. The techniques worked so well that they never stopped using them. Modern political campaigns spend more money on emotional manipulation than on actual policy development. They hire neuroscientists to study brain responses to different messages. They use focus groups to test which words create the strongest emotional reactions. They craft speeches designed to trigger specific neurochemical responses in targeted demographic groups. Corporate marketing has evolved into a form of psychological warfare. Companies now collect thousands of data points about individual consumers to create personalized emotional manipulation campaigns. They know when you are sad, when you are stressed, when you are lonely, and when you are insecure. They time their advertisements to hit you when you are most emotionally vulnerable. Social media platforms have perfected this system beyond what Bernays could have imagined. Their algorithms analyze your behavior patterns to determine which emotions drive you. Engagement. They then feed you content designed to keep you in those emotional states as long as possible. Fear keeps you scrolling through news feeds. Anger keeps you arguing in comment sections. Envy keeps you comparing yourself to others. Loneliness keeps you seeking validation through likes and shares. The business model depends on keeping you emotionally attached to the platform. People who can emotionally detach from these systems become immune to their influence. They can see the manipulation techniques clearly. They can resist the emotional hooks. They can make conscious choices about their attention and energy. This immunity threatens the entire structure of modern influence and control. Detached population cannot be manipulated through fear campaigns. They cannot be sold products they do not need through emotional appeals. They cannot be controlled through tribal loyalty or social pressure. They become ungovernable. This is why emotional detachment is discouraged in schools, pathologized in psychology, and stigmatized in popular culture. It is not because detachment is unhealthy. It is because detachment is threatening to those who profit from human emotional reactivity. But the true scope of this threat goes deeper than politics and marketing. It reaches into the very foundations of how we understand human relationships and social connection. Jung discovered that every person carries a shadow, the parts of themselves they refuse to acknowledge. This shadow contains not just negative traits, but also positive qualities that seem too dangerous or threatening to express openly. Modern society has created a collective shadow around emotional detachment. We are taught that emotional availability equals love, that vulnerability equals authenticity, that sharing feelings equals intimacy. These beliefs create a culture where people perform emotions rather than experience them genuinely. Social media has turned emotional expression into a competitive sport. People share their trauma, their struggles, and their intimate moments for likes, comments, and social validation. This performative vulnerability creates an illusion of connection while actually preventing real intimacy. Real intimacy requires the ability to be emotionally present when appropriate and emotionally detached when necessary. It requires boundaries, discretion, and the wisdom to know when sharing helps and when sharing harms. Emotionally detached people often have deeper, more authentic relationships than those who share everything. They choose their connections carefully. They offer support without becoming enmeshed in others' problems. They can love without losing themselves. That this selective approach to relationships is often misunderstood as coldness or lack of caring. Confusion arises because our culture has conflated emotional intensity with emotional depth. We mistake drama for passion, chaos for excitement, and dependency for love. We have forgotten that the deepest connections often require the least. Observe that many of his patients were suffering not from lack of connection, but from too much of the wrong kind of connection. They were trapped in relationships based on mutual emotional dependency rather than mutual respect and growth. These toxic connections, which Jung called psychological contagion, spread emotional dysfunction from person to person like a virus. Someone who cannot regulate their own emotions seeks out others who will absorb their emotional overflow. This creates codependent relationships where both people become addicted to the emotional drama. Emotional detachment breaks this cycle. A detached person will not absorb someone else's emotional chaos. They will not enable destructive behavior by providing emotional validation for it. They will not sacrifice their own well-being to maintain a relationship that damages both parties. This refusal to participate in emotional dysfunction often makes detached people seem uncaring to those who are accustomed to toxic relationship patterns. But the refusal actually demonstrates a higher form of caring, one that prioritizes genuine healing over temporary emotional relief. The most profound relationships in human history have been built on this foundation of loving detachment. Great teachers maintain emotional distance from their students to provide clear guidance. Great parents create boundaries with their children to encourage independence. Great partners support each other without losing their individual identities. But modern culture has largely forgotten this. wisdom in favor of emotional fusion and psychological enmeshment. The result is a society full of people who mistake emotional reactivity for emotional intelligence, who confuse intensity with intimacy, and who believe that caring means absorbing others' pain rather than helping others heal. Leonardo da Vinci dissected human corpses to understand anatomy. He studied water flow to design flying machines. He observed bird flight to paint angels. His greatest discoveries came from his ability to step back from human emotions and see patterns that others missed. Emotional detachment creates a unique cognitive advantage, the ability to see systems rather than just individual events. When you are emotionally attached to an outcome, your brain filters information to support your desired result. You notice evidence that confirms your hopes and ignore evidence that contradicts them. This confirmation bias protects your emotional investment but blinds you to reality. When you can emotionally detach from outcomes, your brain can process information more objectively. You can see patterns that connect seemingly unrelated events. You can predict consequences that emotional people miss. You can make decisions based on what is rather than what you wish were true. History's greatest innovators, philosophers, and leaders have shared this ability to step outside their emotional reactions and observe situations clearly. Marcus Aurelius wrote his Meditations as exercises in emotional detachment. He practiced viewing his own life from the perspective of cosmic time to maintain clarity during the pressures of ruling an empire. His philosophical insights came from his ability to see his own emotional reactions as temporary events rather than permanent truths. Charles Darwin spent decades observing nature before publishing his theory of evolution. He knew that his ideas would create massive emotional reactions in religious and scientific communities. His emotional detachment from these social pressures allowed him to present evidence clearly and calmly, despite knowing the personal cost. Virginia Woolf explored the deepest aspects of human consciousness by maintaining psychological distance from her own mental illness. Her greatest literary works came from her ability to observe her own emotional states with scientific precision rather than being overwhelmed by them. Modern neuroscience has confirmed what these historical figures discovered through experience. Emotional detachment enhances cognitive function. Brain studies show that people who can regulate their emotions have better working memory, improve focus, and increase creative problem-solving abilities. They can hold multiple perspectives simultaneously without becoming confused. They can change their minds when presented with new evidence without experiencing psychological distress. This cognitive flexibility gives detached individuals enormous advantages in complex situations. They can navigate office politics without becoming personally invested in workplace drama. They can analyze investment opportunities without being swayed by market emotions. They can raise children without projecting their own unfulfilled dreams onto the next generation. Most importantly, they can see through social manipulation that would be invisible to emotionally engaged people. A detached observer can recognize when a news story is designed to trigger outrage rather than inform. They can identify when a political speech is appealing to fear rather than reason. They can spot when a social media post is crafted to generate engagement rather than provide value. This ability to see manipulation clearly makes detached people extremely valuable allies and extremely dangerous enemies to those who profit from human confusion and emotional reactivity. But the greatest advantage of emotional detachment is not external, it is internal. Carl Jung warned that individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are rather than who others expect you to be, was the most difficult journey a human being could undertake. Those who choose emotional detachment as a path to authenticity pay a price that most people are unwilling to consider. The first cost is social isolation. Most social interactions are based on shared emotional reactions to common experiences. When you can step outside these reactions, you lose the automatic connection that comes from emotional resonance with others. You see the movie that everyone loves and recognize the psychological manipulation techniques in the script. You attend the political rally that excites your community and notice the propaganda methods being used. You participate in the social media discussion that engages your friends and observe the tribal signaling patterns. This clarity creates distance between you and others who are still emotionally invested in these experiences. Can cost is the loss of comforting illusions. Emotional attachment often serves as a protective barrier against harsh realities. When you can detach from your emotional investment and how you want the world to be, you must face how the world actually is. You recognize that most people are not interested in truth if it contradicts their emotional needs. You see that many relationships are based on mutual use rather than genuine care. You understand that most social institutions are designed to control behavior rather than serve human flourishing. These insights cannot be unseen once you develop the ability to see them clearly. The third cost is the responsibility that comes with clarity. When you can see manipulation clearly, you must choose whether to participate in it, resist it, or find alternative paths. When you can recognize toxic relationship patterns, you must decide whether to enable them or establish boundaries. When you can identify social problems, this level of conscious choice requires more energy and creates more stress than simply following emotional impulses or social expectations. Jung himself experienced these costs throughout his life. His marriage survived because his wife shared his commitment to psychological development. But many of his friendships ended when people could not tolerate his refusal to participate in conventional emotional games. He was often misunderstood as cold or arrogant when he was actually trying to maintain the emotional distance necessary for clear thinking and genuine helpfulness. Yet, Jung continued to advocate for the importance of emotional detachment because he understood that the alternative was worse, remaining unconscious and manipulable. People who cannot emotionally detach remain vulnerable to every form of psychological manipulation. They can be controlled through their fears, their desires, their tribal loyalties, and their need for social acceptance. They cannot see clearly when they are being used, and they cannot make free choices about their own lives. The price of remaining emotionally attached to outcomes, relationships, and social expectations is the loss of personal autonomy and authentic self-expression. Jung believed that some people are called to pay the price of consciousness for the benefit of humanity as a whole. These individuals serve as psychological pioneers, exploring territories of human experience that others are not yet ready to enter. But for those who are ready, the rewards of conscious emotional detachment far outweigh the costs. Section 8. The INTGRATO emotional maturity is not the absence of feeling. It is the conscious choice of when to engage emotionally and when to maintain distance. Jung's final insight about emotional detachment was that it must be balanced with the capacity for genuine connection. The goal is not to become permanently detached from all emotions, but to develop the wisdom to know when emotional engagement serves you and when it harms you. A master of emotional detachment can feel deeply when appropriate and step back when necessary. They can love without losing themselves. They can care without becoming consumed. They can connect without becoming dependent. This conscious control over emotional responses is what Jung called individuation, the process of becoming a complete, autonomous human being who can choose their responses rather than being controlled by unconscious reactions. The path to this mastery begins with recognizing that your emotions are information, not commands. When you feel angry, that anger is telling you something about your values and boundaries. When you feel afraid, that fear is alerting you to potential threats. When you feel love, that love is highlighting what you find valuable and meaningful. But none of these emotions require you to act immediately or without consideration. You can feel them, understand their message, and then choose your response consciously. This conscious choice is what separates emotionally mature human beings from those who remain trapped in reactive patterns established in childhood or imposed by social conditioning. Practical wisdom for developing healthy emotional detachment starts with daily practices that strengthen your ability to observe your emotional states without being overwhelmed by them. Morning reflection creates space between your automatic reactions and your conscious choices. When you wake up, Spend 5 minutes observing your emotional state without trying to change it. Notice what you are feeling and what might be causing those feelings, but do not immediately react to them. Boundary setting protects your emotional energy from being drained by others' dysfunction. You can care about someone without absorbing their problems. You can offer support without becoming responsible for their choices. You can love someone without enabling their destructive behavior. Information. Diet controls what emotional triggers you expose yourself to daily. Most news, social media, and entertainment is designed to create emotional reactions rather than provide valuable information. Conscious consumption of media protects your emotional equilibrium and mental clarity. The ultimate goal is not to become emotionally numb, but to become emotionally sovereign-free, to choose your emotional responses based on your values and wisdom, rather than being controlled by unconscious patterns or external manipulation. Jung believed that humanity's future depends on enough individuals developing this emotional sovereignty to resist collective madness and maintain clarity during social chaos. The choice is yours. You can remain emotionally attached to outcomes you cannot control, relationships that drain your energy, and social expectations that prevent your authentic expression. Or you can develop the courage to step back, observe clearly, and make conscious choices about where to invest your emotional energy. Emotional detachment is not cold. It is not cruel. It is not disconnection from humanity. It is the foundation of genuine freedom, authentic relationships, and conscious living. It is survival in the truest sense, not just physical survival, but the survival of your authentic self in a world that profits from your confusion and emotional reactivity. The question is not whether you have the right to emotionally detach from what harms you. The question is whether you have the courage to claim that right and use it wisely. Your ancestors developed this capacity over millions of years of evolution. Your brain contains the neural circuits necessary to exercise this ability. Your psychological inheritance includes the wisdom to know when connection serves you and when distance protects you. All that remains is your decision to honor this inheritance and use it to create the life you actually want, rather than the life others expect you to live. The choice to emotionally detach when necessary is not a rejection of humanity. It is the ultimate expression of human consciousness and freedom. This is Carl Jung's gift to you, the understanding that your ability to step back, observe clearly, and choose consciously is not a bug in your psychological system. It is the most important feature. If this exploration of emotional detachment has shifted something in your perspective, you are not alone in this journey. Thousands of others are questioning the same social programming, recognizing the same manipulation patterns, and choosing conscious responses over reactive behaviors. Share this understanding with someone who might benefit from seeing clearly through emotional fog. The algorithms that profit from human reactivity do not want this knowledge to spread, which is exactly why it must. Leave a comment about your own experiences with emotional detachment. What manipulation techniques have you learned to recognize? What relationships have you had to step back from to maintain your clarity? Your insights might be the key that unlocks freedom for someone else struggling with the same patterns. Subscribe if you want to explore more of Jung's dangerous insights about human consciousness and social control. The psychological establishment spent decades trying to bury these ideas because they threaten systems that depend on human emotional reactivity. Use this knowledge wisely. Your consciousness is not just your personal inheritance. It is your contribution to humanity's evolution beyond manipulation and toward authentic freedom.